look bro, watching EastEnders is a fucking joke. Free bro, trapping it dead, the nitty still clacking and ringing my phone. Ringing, chilling with bro, talking about money, dope to the dome.
FTR too ill. Free the riches and fuck the rational bigger. A1 from the 9, them man are drillers. Scout trapping, I'm winning, I'm winning. Scout trapping with a double barrel, I'm sinning. Up close with that double barrel, that rap boy got finished. 250 with a kickstart, that double clutch, I'm whizzing. The opposition of some any niggas, and I'll bang any niggas with it.
I ain't tryna hear no chat, I ain't tryna hear no verbal. Man put food in a trap, man never see me burgle. Man put corn in a whack, up block tours we circle. Man get arm in a pack, some of the haze come purple. Man chingy on ops, cats ringing want lots. And clingy got dots, she's a bad bee, she give tops.
2 publications out at the start of this year. Tell us about the first one, about drill music and its links there.
Initially my research came on the back of some previous research I was doing, looking at social media and its impact on young people, or social media being a catalyst and a trigger for youth and gang violence. That was done with Catch-22 and a colleague of mine, Dr. Kurt Irving Rogers. So one of the things that I started to look at in terms of the research I was doing around young people and violence was looking at how social media impacts young people and the way it shapes behaviours, attitudes, and also reshapes attitudes and behaviours. So one of the things that I also started to look at was music videos. And I know that a lot of young people within the UK utilise your social media platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, Twitter to project, to discuss, to, express their issues, concerns, problems, or how they just perceive the environments in which they live. And one of the things that for me was becoming quite prevalent in terms of phenomena within the UK was this concept or this new genre of drill music. Drill music is a subgenre of hip hop, a style of hip hop that comes from the south side of Chicago, which is very overt and expressive in terms of its content about behaviours, types of behaviours and what individuals essentially do. So there's a lot of reports that have come out quite recently that look at the impact of social media, drill music and violence, but nothing really demonstrated that from an academic perspective. So one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of look at drill music as it comes from Chicago and look at some of the key groups within the UK that have essentially profited off the concept of drill music. So what I did was I studied the content, what was the content in which young people were talking about utilising this particular style. So we were seeing things like young people talking about killing, young people talking about shooting, young people talking about stabbing, young people talking about how they wanted to harm people, and was very expressive. So I wanted to also look at, well, what is that in terms of the correlation between young people and also gangs in which utilise this type of content on social media platforms. And one of the things that I thought was best to start at was the whole concept of social media. Now, there's a debate within sociology and criminology and psychology about what are some of the key things and the key reasons why young people are becoming more violent within inner city communities or society as a whole. And although we can focus on issues such as, dysfunctional families, the impact of the cuts and dismantlement of youth services, and we can look at mental health, we can look at trauma, we can look at, lack of opportunity, lack of resources for community, poor leadership, lack of policing in particular areas. We can't ignore this new variable which I'm talking about, which is now social media. And as young people become more social media privy or have access to social media, we're also starting to see their behaviours. So that's why you can look at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube now and you're seeing fights, you're seeing people getting attacked, you're seeing people beat up. But one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate within this particular article is how social media is making our society narcissistic. It's causing young people to be narcissistic, everyone wanting to be on the camera. Everything is about the likes culture. Everybody wants to show what they're doing, what they're projecting, how they're behaving, the things that they've got. And a lot of those things are untrue. Some of those things are true and mixed with reality. So most of the arguments that take place and the discrepancies or the conflicts that take place on social media, quite quickly what we see that is being amplified that into the physical world. So an individual disrespects somebody on a social media platform. In some cases, within 12 hours, there's a shooting, a stabbing, and an attack. So in my particular publication that I've done in conjunction with Birmingham City University with my colleague, Shona Robinson Edwards, one of the things that we were looking at was what is the correlation between the violence, what is the correlation between the things that we see in Chicago and some of the behaviours that we see now. And based on the research, we actually found that there was no difference. The language, the behaviours, the dress code, the expressions were exactly the same. The only difference was that in Chicago, in some of the videos and the content in those videos, they show firearms, and we see less of that in terms of the video content that we see here within the UK. So it was very interesting in terms of what the findings actually found. So the key things that for me, that we essentially focus on is this correlation between narcissism, nihilism and violence, and one kind of triggered the other. So a man disrespects you, a young person disrespects you, you feel you have to respond now. And the key thing that we were looking at was the audience, because I think that's a variable that doesn't get explored in terms of the research and the current research, and it's not really part of the conversation. And what I mean by the audience, I'm talking about the viewership that watch these videos. So we're talking about an Instagram live, we're talking about Facebook lives where individuals are watching individuals do criminal activity, and people are almost live commenting, you know, telling people or dictating what they want people to do or what they want to see in terms of that. So when you look at some of these videos and you look at some of the content that's put online, you're talking about thousands of viewership. That's not gang members. It's not solely gang members. These are sometimes impressionable young people that kind of are inspired in some very weird ways about this type of behavior. So for me, when we talk about the concept of gangs and violence, or we're talking about young people and violence, one of the things that I don't do is just keep categorizing all the violence that we see within the society as gangs, because what we're seeing is a spread of young people that are also becoming violent. So when you read the article, what it talks about is, yes, gangs utilize social media platforms just like anybody else uses social media platforms in certain ways. But what I also talk about is the inspiration, where the viewership, the audience take from that. And the audience oftentimes amplify the violence. So if me and you were individuals, or me and you were two individuals posing from two different postcodes, or we're two rappers, you make a song, the audience then tell me that you've disrespected me. So the audience kind of expect me to respond to you. Why? Because in previous videos, I say that I shoot people. In previous videos, I say I don't take disrespect. In previous videos, I say anyone that disrespects me, me and my boys are going to come through and we're going to respond to that particular issue. So the violence is amplified by the audience. So what we're seeing is social media now is again shaping people's behaviors, whether that is slang, language, behaviors, the way that they look, the way that they express, and also the way that they respond to the violence. So with the rise of violence that we're now seeing in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and now other areas around, this is one of the key factors. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but it's definitely one of the factors.
On that point then about social media, do you think that it's a new problem? I mean, the drill music seems to be quite new. Social media is relatively new as well. Is this a totally new problem?
I think it adds to the series of factors in which we've mentioned before. And I think, you know, the point that I keep stressing is that a lot of people, when they hear social media, young people, violence, they say, oh, no, it's not about social media, it's about deprivation, it's about, you know, lack of opportunities, a lack of, you know, entrepreneurship in the community, poor leadership. And I agree. The research suggests that all of those things are the reasons in which why. But I say again that social media has become a new phenomena. Drill music has also become some phenomena. It's different to grime. It's again projected, imported from the south side of Chicago, and it's now here in the UK. And the expressions are exactly the same of what we see in the south side of Chicago. And I think it's also important that we look at Chicago. We're talking about, you know, homicides over, you know, 750 last year. And when you're talking about the levels of deprivation, the separatism that takes place, and the racism that takes place in those places, and you look at all of these contexts, and you look at young people and how they express themselves, and then we also look at how young people are expressing themselves here. But I think there's another important thing that we need to also consider and talk about, that despite talking about the concept of social media, drill music and violence, we can't also ignore that there are companies that benefit and profit of young people talking about these types of behaviours. We can't ignore that. So it's kind of a catch-22 for a lot of young people. So when people talk about, oh, we need to boycott certain media platforms, young people should be told not to, you know, spit these types of lyrics in their bars, I hear that particular argument, but we have to also consider, well, what's the alternative? Because there are companies that are prepared to sign people and pay them in order to talk about this type of behaviours. So a young man that comes out of jail, or a young person in the community that, one, is probably struggling to get work. 2, doesn't believe that he can get a job. 3, feels that he doesn't have any other options to make money other than criminality. Why not talk about my experiences and the things that I'm doing in my community? Because I can see individuals that have made it in America, individuals that have made it in the UK, in certain parts of Europe from this music, so I might as well do it. It's because when they put their music on iTunes and the whole community are able to see these things and say, you know what, my man can spit bars and these guys seem like they got a little bit of talent, you potentially can get some money from that. So they know that there's legs in drill music. They know that projecting certain types of behaviors can get financial benefit. But then we don't also ever look at the companies that are also profiting off the bloodshed. We don't ever look at the companies that are, you know, allowing people to sign contracts and talk about killing, shooting, stabbing, bitches, hoes or whatever else. And they don't see how that in terms of, you know, and then we look at other big industries like, you know, Nike and Adidas that allow certain artists to project to wear their clothing so their prices go up in terms of sales of tracksuits, jogging bottoms, you know, t-shirts and trainers, which is all fine. But then in the same breath, you're saying that in a society that these same young people shouldn't be in their communities expressing their certain types of behaviours. So I'm saying that we're in a society that's also hypocritical. We blame young people, but don't ever point the finger at a capitalist society that tell young people that you can make money off bloodshed, you can make money off killing people. So whether those young people go to jail, whether those young people end up in the ground, or they end up in a mental health institute, someone else still benefits off iTunes, someone still benefits off these record companies. And I think these are the things that we need to talk about. So when we're talking about social media, music and violence, we can't just ignore all of the other variables that are in between.
It's a really, really interesting point that you make there. And as much as I say that drill music is new and social media is new, that issue that you talk about there isn't new. This is something that's been the case before I was born, essentially, where money is the overall ride of it because of, you know, the larger companies, and then, you know, lyrics don't matter as much then. So alongside social media and alongside deprivation, which is what you mentioned, is it very important then that, you know, people at the top, so to speak, look at this, and what do you think that they should do instead?
I think the whole society need to pay attention to what these key factors are. And I think one of the things that we see, you know, in terms of, you know, last week we seen the head of the Met talk about social media is to blame for social media of the rising, for example, knife crime in London. And we look at Birmingham in terms of gun crime capital, and we look at all of these different issues. Now I'm going to agree to one aspect and say social media is a reason, but it's not the only reason. But I think what we do as a society is we just kind of use one particular factor and use that as the scapegoat. And what we're saying is that yes, social media is a factor, but it's not the only factor. Because how can you just say social media is the issue without addressing mental health? How can you say mental health alone is the only issue and you've forgot what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the cuts in services? How can you say that all of the cuts in services, you know, have impacted and is the only reason without looking at households, families, the lack of education, poor education coming from certain schools in terms of, you know, allowing young people to come out with the right qualifications or actually just being educated properly. So we're looking at all of these different factors, and I think what our country often do is we focus on the one, and I think community also do it too. We focus on one and ignore the others. And what I'm saying is we need to get to a place where we have to look at all of these issues holistically. And I talk about this concept of a paradigm shift in terms of how we engage these particular issues. We need to stop looking at things in a very short lens, and that short lens is looking at things and saying, well, if it's violence, it has to be gangs. And I go back to my earlier point and I talk about the audience, because that audience ain't gang members. The audience that are watching these issues and are shaping their behaviours, perceptions and the things that they do on social media and also into the physical world are shaped by these particular things, and oftentimes ain't gang members. So these are the things that we need to consider when we're looking at these particular issues. There's not one solution to the problem, there's multiple solutions to the problem. And I think that from this particular publication, one, it's unique, it's new, nobody's done it before from a theoretical perspective, from a UK perspective and an urban perspective. And I think, you know, parents, community leaders, youth workers, any practitioner that works with young people, policymakers and government officials can all take benefit from this article about moving forward, not pointing the blame at young people, but looking at all of the factors in which causes young people to do these things on social media platforms.